Hi, Jessica. First off, thank you so much for sharing this piece and letting me give feedback and read it. I know we're a little bit more familiar with this process, but it's still new. So thank you. I really enjoy getting to read about a middle school classroom. I also got to read Rachel's piece this week, and you guys both talked about a middle school classroom, and it's so fascinating to me. And it was really interesting to read about it and kind of see what was different and if anything was similar to primary world. But I'll start with your author's agenda and then go through some of the markings that I made on your paper. Just highlighted some areas that I really liked and really enjoyed as a reader, and some areas where I just had a few questions. So in your author's agenda, you wanted to talk about keeping a balance between the informational and the narrative, and then also with the transitions um, between the two different types, which I also struggled with, so I'll do my best here. um, but when I started reading your piece, the very first sentence stuck out to me. Um, it took me back to my own memory of middle school and how I had really loved writing in elementary school and how it kind of faded away once I got into, you know, the older grades where things were taken more seriously, things were more for state assessments and for grades. And this gave me an overall feel as to what level you were going to be writing about, and also what it was that you were going to be teaching them, and what that lesson was going to be. So I liked the way that you introduced this narrative. As I go through, you also start to talk about how your feelings on the subject are and how you fell in love with the author's ability to paint those vivid pictures. I like that you put your own thoughts and feelings in there. And how you wanted to use those to influence your students. I thought that was important because you asked, what if I allow the students to escape those type of writing assignments and let them be free and write like those authors that you love. So I thought these sentences here were really great for a transition. And I like that you were asking a question. It was a good lead into what the lesson was. Um, I'll say this now before I forget, but there was this part here where you kind of introduced it as for the lesson. And I wonder if there was a way we could have transitioned this differently. Um, as I read through your piece, I noticed that I didn't really understand. I did because as an educator, and as I've read the same pieces and articles, I understand where your lesson came from. But as a reader who hadn't experienced the same things, I was a little confused as to where you had gotten the ideas for these lessons from, where you were referencing to. So I wonder if this would be a good spot to kind of transition into those references, and part of that standard where you can cite those references. I wonder if this would be a good transition into doing that um, here after this specific transition from your thoughts into like the action of what you're going to do, if that makes sense. I really like how you use the word perfect here. I liked getting that like kind of insight into your mind, into what you were thinking at that time. I also really liked how you described the students here where they were glancing at each other when you pulled out the mentor text, because I've seen middle school girls, I coach middle school girls. I know the side eyes that they can give and they can be rough. So I can just picture this happening. And I thought it was really interesting. And I liked that you incorporated that because as a primary teacher, I wouldn't have expected that if I pulled out the book, um, where the wild things are, they would have lost it and they would have loved it right away, and we would have been using it for a totally different purpose. So I like that you included this in here. The reason that this part is blue is because I wondered if there was more that you could use from the narrative telling perspective to make me, will help me understand those students a little bit better. I wonder if there was any dialogue or any other actions that took place during that time to help me better understand the class and the group of kids that you were teaching. Um, Probably since second grade. That's funny because I teach second grade, so I did laugh at that actually when I was reading it the first time. Um, but I like that you said, but there's a reason I'm using a picture book. And I understand that that is dialogue. That was something you said to the kids. But for me, it drove the point home of the book is here for a purpose. This lesson is centering around this book. Um, so they're talking about the different words. Um, and then down here, you said after reading the book, I wondered if you could elaborate a little more on the book. You had talked about the that he had to be very careful about his words. So I wondered if there was anything specific that you pointed out or that the kids noticed while you were reading the book. The figurative language and choices. I wondered if this would be a good part to incorporate again more of that narrative to help me understand why you had chosen this specific book for your lesson. And what types of things your students noticed as you were reading or what you pointed out. But as I continued, you were talking about the quick write task, and I really like that you put two different students who were doing two totally different things. Will and Natalie, I could see it. Like I could see one kid on this side of the room really having a hard time, and I could see Natalie over here just going for it. Um, and I can kind of feel that as a teacher when you're watching that, you're like, what do I do? What happened? Um, so I like that you put the two like juxtaposing behaviors there. And then I like that you tied both of them back in later in the piece because you talked about Will's piece. I forgot to highlight it, but you talked about Will's piece being very to the point, very factual. But then you talked about Natalie's piece being third person, describing herself as the girl, being detached. I honestly would really like to read that piece. That made me want to read it. So I did really like that. This was orange just because I liked it. There's no problem with it. But and I know that um, word, word limit was a factor, but you said reading over the student's work. I wondered if there was more of a transition we could use into um, the dialogue that was happening between your students to reading over the student's work, or if there was something you were thinking or something that you noticed during the student's work um, that you could have used to help transition that. Um, just a thought. Um, and then as I finished, I really love the way that you ended this because you said, I hope to express to my students that there's a time and a place for correctness. However, sometimes you should write simply to write, to jot your thoughts and emotions down for nobody's benefit but your own. This is how true writers are made. This was a really good way to wrap up the reasoning for using quick writes, the reasoning for just writing and not having to be correct. And it kind of just summarized the whole purpose of that lesson. And it also shows what your intentions are as a teacher. So when I'm reading this, I kind of know like this is what she wants to do for her class. And I know that this eighth grade class wasn't yours, but it was somebody's. So you just stepped in there and taught, um, and you were able to teach this great lesson. So you want to be able to carry that on. And I thought that was a great way to end it. Um, and it was very hopeful. It was a very hopeful message to kind of leave us off with at the end of your piece. But the last part that I did leave blue was this part. If I were to continue this lesson into a unit, I would give the students more time to finish writing the event in question. Again, it's just another one of those transitions. I wonder if there's a different way we could transition this. I wonder if we can incorporate more of a narrative or maybe your thoughts, to kind of soften that transition from reflecting on what was happening to thinking about how would I do it different. Um, I just wonder if there's a way we could reword that. But I really did enjoy your piece. I thought it was great. I hope that the lesson was as great as it was when I read about it. And again, thank you so much for sharing this. Hopefully everything was helpful, but if you have any questions, feel free to ask.